Hello everyone, this is part 30 of What If Naruto Was Like the Sage of Six Paths, and I hope you guys enjoy this video and to like, to subscribe, to share, and check out the playlist, to see more comment down below. Now let's start the intro.
They call me a god. They call me a god. They call me a god.
Join my membership, the perks are great. It's in the description. Are you sure about this? The campfire crackled lightly as the 14 sat around it in a loose circle, Haku looking across at Naruto expectantly. No, not really, but we don't have any better leads right now, it's this or trekking through Tsuchi no Kuni. Naruto's response was calm, as it often was. He was currently leaning quite peacefully against the thick trunk of a tree. It had been a while since the group had actually stayed for long in any kind of civilized area, and they were all beginning to miss the feel of smooth cotton beneath their backs at night. That would not be a good idea, considering our last trip there. Naruto just nodded at Fu while the other two looked at them confusedly. They still didn't know all the details of Naruto's travels. Why? What's the deal with Tsuchi no Kuni? Being from that nation herself, at least when she was very young, Tayuya was slightly curious to the two Jinchuriki's apparent aversion to the land. Naruto just chuckled, waving absently as he warmed his hands over the fire. He could do the same with fire-natured chakra, but this was less wasteful. Let's just say that Iwagakure still holds a little bit of a grudge towards the Yondaime Hokage, and that tends to include anyone with blonde spiky hair. He pointed at his own head of golden locks to emphasize the point. Tayuya just nodded knowingly. Even when she was young, the Yondaime's name was only said in hushed, hateful whispers. Like people were afraid he'd show up if his name was said. Actually, you do look a bit like the bastard. It was true, despite Naruto's much longer hair and the fact the color was just a bit lighter. Give him a haircut and some contacts and he would bet he's spitting image of the man. So I've been told. The young monk remembered his sensei's warnings about going to Tsuchi no Kuni when he first left the temple. But then again, you could say the same thing about a few Yamanakas. I even saw a few people who looked like him in Kumo. Tayuya just shrugged. It made no difference to her who Naruto looked like. He was powerful and that was what mattered. So Myabokuzen, you really think it's in Kaminari no Kuni? Haku's soft voice see into the conversation, bringing him back on topic. He was the only one not warming himself by the fire, feeling very content with the refreshingly chill night air of Shimo no Kuni. After all, Zabuza had really pushed his Kekkei Genkai training when he was young, often submerging him in snow so he could get a feel for his element. The young Yuki was just glad he hadn't made him strip down to do it. He might have developed some kind of strange mental condition to strip in inappropriate places. Naruto just hummed at the question before finally shrugging carelessly. I don't know, but it's one of the few places on the continent with imposing mountains unless we want to make the trek into the wastelands to the west. Much of what was beyond the great deserts of Kase no Kuni and the badlands of Tsuchi no Kuni was considered wilderness, uncharted territory that was unmapped and completely lawless. Even the stoic samurai of Tetsu no Kuni hadn't tried to expand their borders into the hostile lands that didn't even know of the shinobi system. It had been that way for as long as recorded history. Occasionally an intrepid explorer would brave the wastes, none would ever return. I don't think summoning realms are even in this plane, or if they're then they would be very well hidden. Fu, always the voice of logic and reason, decided to weigh in on the conversation. But if it is the case, why not simply ask one of your summons? Such as that young salamander you once summoned. In fact, if Fu remembered correctly, which she did, it was in this very same country. The added heat from the fiery lizard would also be very much welcomed. I did. I summoned Kahonu and a few others, but they all told me the same thing. Without having a contract with them, they cannot tell me where their realm is, or even if it is somewhere reachable to humans. Tayuya just snorted at that, pointing out the obvious as she so often did. Why not make a summoning contract with them? That would solve your problem, right? Naruto just sighed, leaning back against the tree again as he tilted his head up. It turns out I can't. Obviously the same thought had occurred to him, so he had summoned the boss of the salamanders, a particularly vicious and scarily large creature named Kodaihaha. Because I have the ability to summon any creature I wish without a contract, there is the possibility I will be unfaithful in my summoning. Like a ninja trying to obey more than one cage. As soon as any of the bosses saw my eyes, they refused to allow me to sign their contract. The rest of the group frowned at that. It always seemed as though the easy options were barred to them. It was a shame Tsunade-sensei couldn't be more helpful. Naruto could only nod with Fu again. That had been a large blow to them. It had been a few months since their talk with the Shodai and the Daime Hokage, and since then they had managed to find Tsunade, asking for her help. However, even with her vouching for them, they had received an all too familiar response from the kind and peaceful Katsuya. Without a contract, they could not reveal the location of Shikotsu Forest. The obvious answer had likewise been for one of them to sign the contract. However, this time it was Tsunade who stood in their way. The female Sannin had been adamant that the one she would finally allow to sign the contract would be her one true apprentice. Unfortunately, while skilled, Shizune was not nearly of the caliber Tsunade was, or even was at her age. Fu was eligible. After all, even with her inner tenant, her abilities with medical ninjutsu were admirable, prodigal even considering her circumstances. However, the commitment would tear her away from Naruto, as being Tsunade's apprentice was a full-time affair. Once again they were left in AS. Anyway, even if one of them were to sign the slug contract, only they would get the privilege of entering Shikotsu Forest. It seemed that the answer to their senjutsu problem did not lie with summoning animals themselves. The only thing they had left was to try and discover their realms themselves. Then of course would come the question of how the summons might react to the intrusion into their homes, but Naruto would cross that particular bridge when he came to it, as he always did. We can't blame her, she has her own obligations to fulfill as a summoner. She was still kind enough to at least vouch for us. Fu said nothing as she turned her gaze back to the fire. She had a feeling that if they did go looking for Myobokuzen or any of the other summoning realms, it would be a long and arduous journey for them all. She was simply thankful that they were under no kind of time restraints or pressure. She had her entire life to aid Naruto's dream where she could. What if it all just turns out to be another false lead, like the last time? The group fell silent under Haku's cold observation, the ice wielder looking around at all of their faces as their thoughts turned inwards. Finally Naruto let out a long sigh before a warm, comforting smile crept across his face, lit by the gently swaying flames of the campfire. In that case we move on to the next one. He chuckled a little as he looked into the flickering flames, the fire lighting up his rippled eyes in an intricate and entrancing display of light. You know, in this situation even a year ago I might have quoted my master, saying something like, "Life's a journey, not a destination." However, I think I'm tired of parroting my teacher's sayings. He looked back up, capturing each of his companions' eyes one by one. Even Tayuya found herself quietened by those deep, vexing eyes. It may take a lifetime to reach my goal. For all I know I will fail and have to leave it to somebody else following in my footsteps, but I'm thankful to have you guys along with me. You make the lonely and long path I walk worth traveling, so thank you. There was a moment of silence as his words settled over the group before naturally Tayuya was the first to break it. Are quite getting all mushy. It doesn't suit someone like you. However, she had to turn away slightly, silently thankful for the dim light hiding the majority of the small hint of red creeping across the bridge of her nose. Naruto just chuckled quietly to himself as a calm quiet settled over the group. He really meant his words. However, for just the briefest of moments he allowed the barest of frowns to etch his features. Haku's words held merit. The last supposed lead they had ended in a disturbing manner. Naruto didn't even bother to hide his eyes as he gazed out at the horrific sight before them, his expression hardened against the atrocities. Grey ash floated in the air, settling on the ground in a light blanket like some sick perversion of snow. The remains of houses, possibly homes, lay broken and ruined on the ground, the wood smoldering quietly, still warm to the touch while the stone lay scattered and broken. Occasionally they would spot a twisted hand sticking up out of the wreckage and desolation, some of them not even large enough to have been teens. A week ago they had stumbled upon what they thought might be a possible lead. A supposed minor village hidden in the heart of Kuma no Kuni that apparently practiced with a dangerous and mysterious form of chakra. However, all they found was ruin and destruction. It wasn't even all that long ago if the cooling fires that still dotted the landscape were anything to go on. The air was heavily saturated in chakra, telling of an enormous fight between ninja. However, all Naruto could feel was sickened. He couldn't understand how such a travesty could be allowed to occur. There was really nothing left, nothing had been spared. It was AS in every sense of the word. However, as he gazed about the broken and ravished landscape, he couldn't help but find something eerily familiar about the destruction he was seeing. It was the occasional body that looked to have been crushed under their own weight, or a man lying still with no signs of injury whatsoever, as if he had simply without cause. As he walked through the ash-lined streets, his foot brushed something. He looked down to see a long strip of purple cloth. Gently bending down, he picked it up, noticing the tarnished metal on the other side. It was a headband. The small star symbol that once proudly sat upon the head of a shinobi was scarred and twisted, stained with a few spots of B as it sat limply on its torn and scorched cloth. Naruto's hand tightened around the symbol of Hoshigakure as his gaze turned back up, now fierce and full of anger. Who would do this? That was what he said out loud, but internally it was a whole other question. Inside he wonders just who could do this. There were no enemy B, nothing to even suggest an attacking force in the first place. That meant it was a small group of powerful shinobi, or even more worryingly, one man. However, who could possess the power to walk into a hidden village, even a minor one like this, and wreak such havoc? Unfortunately, the answer that his mind provided was grim and frightening. He could. He didn't let that distract him as the group continued to walk through the devastated village, hoping but not optimistic that they would find any survivors. Finally, they came across what seemed to be the heart of the village, an enormous crater that seemed much older than the surrounding damage, older than the village itself. At the very center was a ruined building, in just the same state of destruction as the rest of the village. However, Naruto's eyes widened as he felt something different. He was down there in an instant, using chakra to steady his footsteps on the uneven and steep terrain as he descended the crater wall. A few moments later and he was heaving up an enormous wooden beam, revealing the pale but still breathing form of a young girl. She couldn't have been that much older than they were. Her once soft brown hair was now matted with sweat and dirt, the tidy bangs thrown into messy disarray and singed badly on one side. Her pale, freckled face that at a time Naruto might have called cute was now twisted into a look of pain, tears staining her cheeks. Even from a precursory glance, Naruto knew they had been too late. A large wooden beam had completely pierced through the girl's side, and the pressure from the wood was the only reason she hadn't bled out yet. Even soon it could have done nothing to help this girl save, make her passing easier. Mizu, Ra. The girl coughed painfully, letting a small trickle of red drip down her chin, which Naruto quickly wiped away. Her eyes were dull and unseeing, yet she still managed to look up at Naruto, the once kind and caring orbs staring up at him blankly as tears continued to percolate around the edges of her eyes. Naruto quietly shushed her as a glowing green hand traced steady circles across her abdomen, soothing and numbing as much of the pain as he could. Immediately the girl sighed from relief, her head dropping back to the floor softly as she stared up at the sky. It's okay now, you're going to be fine, Mizura is fine. Naruto had to wipe away a small tear that forced its way out of the corner of his eye as a forced smile strained on his face. His words seemed to calm the girl, though, as a measure of peace entered her face, her red-stained lips turning up at the sides. A moment later the girl's heart rate increased slightly as her eyes widened, her breaths coming out more ragged, panicked even. Have to, warn, have to, red clouds, star, orange Mars. The glow around Naruto's hand a few moments later, after the little light left in the girl's eyes completely faded away. He knelt there for a while, staring at the young girl, another person he was too late to save. A determined look entered his eyes, though, as his hand reached out. This wasn't the first time he had been too late, this wasn't the first time he had fixed it anyway, he could still. Naruto. A hand wrapped softly around his wrist, making him look up to see Fu standing to his side, gently holding his arm as she stared unblinkingly at the girl on the ground. Don't. The blonde's eyes widened as he looked up at her, her calm expressionless gaze turning to meet his own. What? How could you say that, Fu? I could still save her, I can still save her. Fu just shook her head slowly, making Naruto blink as a hint of sadness entered her eyes, which spoke volumes to the monk. Let her rest with her village, there is nothing left for her in this world anymore. Naruto gulped as he remembered Shizuku's words to him back in Konoha, I don't belong here anymore, my time passed. Slowly he allowed his trembling hand to fall back to his side, his mind still echoing that conversation like some cruel recording stuck in his mind, but I couldn't save you. He still vividly remembered Shizuku's saddened smile, maybe you weren't supposed to. With a shuddering sigh the young blonde stood back up, looking around at his friends and taking a moment to settle himself. We should at least bury their B. The S deserved that much respect. His companions simply nodded as they silently set about their task. It would be a long day and night for them all. The mountainous road they traveled along felt unnaturally warm for the season, enough so that the group had abandoned the traveling cloaks to avoid boiling themselves alive. Naruto, who was used to the intense summer heats of High no Kuni and the scorching summer sun of Sunagakur, was faring the best and strode along confidently at the front. He knew he should have felt a little uneasy traveling through Kaminari no Kuni so openly, but it was such a good day that he couldn't find it in him to care. After all, the last time he had been here he hadn't exactly left on the best of terms with Kumogakur. However, since then he had grown his hair out and lost his whisker marks. He felt as though he at least wouldn't be recognized at first glance. Just to be safe though, he had taken to traveling with his shakuju sealed away in a storage scroll safely tucked away on his hip, likewise with the Kohaku no Johei. They were also tracing a wide path around Kumogakur and so far had only run into a light smattering of their shinobi, all of the Chunin guards that were far too bored by their patrols to care about a few travelers heading up into the mountains in the north of the country. Are we there yet? Naruto had to suppress a chuckle as Tayuya's ever so slightly whiny voice called out from near the back of the group. Well, considering we don't even know where there is, I'm going to say no. The redhead merely sighed, her whole upper body flopping forward pathetically as the small group trudged on. They walked on for another hour before Naruto paused, looking back curiously before shrugging it off. A few minutes later though, and he did it again as he felt something on the very fringes of his sensory ability, then it was gone again. Now more wary, the group continued on again. However, they didn't make it more than 10 steps before Naruto was forced to whirl around, unsealing his shakuju in one smooth motion just in time to block the strike of a short, pointed sword practically humming with lightning chakra. He pushed up, using the enhanced strength he had learned from Tsunade to push back his much larger opponent. However, when the man jumped back, Naruto had to pause for a moment as he blinked in surprise. Kiribi. Sure enough, there stood the Hachibi Jinchuriki, one of his many swords in hand and a cool, confident smirk on his face. Well, I must say 9-0, that was mighty impressive how you blocked my blow, ya fool. Despite the friendly face, Naruto didn't drop his guard even as Kiribi replaced his sword in its sheath on his back. He knew the man was plenty powerful even without it. However, no sooner had the man sheathed his blade, he was forced to duck as a green blur passed over his head in a kick. On instinct, the bulky Jinchuriki caught the offending leg and promptly, and ungracefully, threw Fu across the path towards Naruto, where she landed silently on her feet, her face a mask of cool professionalism. Or man, if it ain't Little Miss 7, or that's the way I see it, I bet with the Nanabi you really know how to flit, ya fool. Even Fu had to blink at the eccentric man's odd style of talking, especially considering he had broke out into some kind of odd dance involving throwing his hands about. Seeing how easily he had counted Fu, Tayuya, and Haku wisely stopped themselves attacking him, instead making their way over to stand next to Naruto. The blonde just watched Kiribi for a few moments longer, eyebrow raised curiously at the lack of hostile intent from the man. So you were the one I kept noticing, how did you get by sensory ability? Kiribi just crossed his meaty arms over his sea, a satisfied smirk overcoming his features. Yo say ho. Never underestimate the might of the one and only Kiribi. Float like a butterfly, sting like AKB, cause I'm the mightiest of the Jinchuriki, fool ya fool. He punctuated his rhyme by bobbing his head along to some invisible beat, thoroughly confusing those that hadn't met him before. What's up with this guy? He touched in the head or something? Kiribi just pouted at Tayuya with a hurt expression, looking comical on the fearsomely large man. Yo, don't diss what you don't know. You starting to sound like my big bro, ya fool. A tick mark appeared over Tayuya's eye as her hands tightened into fists, glaring angrily at the dark-skinned Jinchuriki. Who the hell are you calling a fool, you damn s? Kiribi just smirked at the seething redhead before turning to Naruto, pissing Tayuya off even more at being ignored. Man 9-0, where you pick up this firecracker? Since you been gone you certainly ain't been no slacker, ya fool. Naruto just sighed in slight exasperation at the man, not relaxing at all. He figured if Kiribi meant them harm he would have attacked by now, but it was very difficult to tell with the flighty and unpredictable Kumo Jinchuriki. It's good to see you too, Kiribi. The man pouted again, crossing his hands over his sea before splaying them out as he signed to another silent beat. Yo, that's Kiribi-sama to you and you should know it, cause when the Hachibi starts he don't just blow ya full. Naruto just absently waved the man off. They had been through this before the last time he was in Kumogakur. The other Jinchuriki just seemed to shake off the apparent disrespect, though, standing in an easy, unguarded stance. You know Mr. 9-0, you really upset Miss Yugito, she been ballin' and raggin' and just won't quit, so much so this Jinchuriki had to split, ya full. As much as Naruto found Kiribi's raps odd, he had to hand it to the man, he was good at coming up with them on the spot. I would apologize, but I don't think she would take it all that well to be honest. Kiribi paused for a minute before chuckling, nodding to what the blonde was saying before a thought seemingly occurred to him. He took out a little notebook and pencil before jotting something down, mumbling to himself. Honest, dismissed. Nah, pianist, nah. He paused before shrugging, pocketing the book away as he returned his attention to the small group of teens to see them eyeing him incredulously. What is it, ya fools? This Jinchuriki gotta keep his rhymes tight, otherwise these raps'll lose their bite, fool ya fools. A moment of awkward silence passed and Naruto could have sworn he heard the sound of a single cicada chirping, but he dismissed it with a cough. They weren't even indigenous to this region. So you're not here because of Yugito? Kiribi just shook his head, arms still crossed over his beefy C in that odd stance of his. Nah man, that ain't my plan. I needed a new locale, so I figured I'd take a sabbatical, fool. Lately my rhymes been real lacking and I been feeling blue, so I'm going to learn from the best enka artist that's still cracking, Master Sabu. Once again Kiribi made his various strange signs with his hands that, if Naruto hadn't known him before, he might have mistaken for some strange variation for hand seals, and bobbed his head along to the beat in his mind. It only elicited another sigh from the blonde as he placed a hand against his forehead to ward off the coming headache. Honestly, how did the rakeage deal with this constantly? So you aren't here because of me taking the nibby? Kiribi quickly shook his head again, patting the kanji for iron that was sealed onto his shoulder, obviously the equivalent of Naruto's 8 trigrams seal on his stomach. Nah man, Hachibi-sama already talked with the fiery cat and she says that her new Jinchuriki is all that. You ain't no fool, so me and you are cool, ya fool. Contradictory statements aside, Naruto was quite relieved at that. Facing against Kiribi was inadvisable, the man was quite obviously powerful. Not to mention the fact he was in full control of his Bijuu's chakra and the two worked together in sync. It wouldn't be the first time Naruto faced against a full Beiyu transformation, but there was a difference between the 3 tails and the 8 tails, 5 tails worth of a difference. Well, in that case it really is good to see you again Kiribi, how have you been? The broad man just grinned and put his hand forward, fist out as he held it there in a gesture Naruto recognized. I been real good Mr. 9, things in Kumo been real fine. He chuckled for a moment as Naruto bumped fists with the older Jinchuriki. He offered the same gesture towards Fu, but the girl just stared at him until he put the fist back down, a small sweat drop on the side of his face. Man, that's real cold Miss 7, why you gotta take away this Jinchuriki's S of heaven, ya fool. Fu just continued to stare at the large man until he finally looked away, chuckling slightly nervously. He could still feel her eyes boring holes in the side of his skull. He recovered well though. But oh man Mr. 9, you'd best believe my bro was mad. The fact I was outer the village at the time makes me hella glad. For briefest moment Kiribi shuddered, memories of a certain iron claw technique flashing through his mind. Then he looked up in thought, pausing for a moment as if he was having a conversation in his mind before breaking out in a large grin. Oh, but this is even more tight, and that ain't no slight. Hachibi-sama says you lookin' for the home of the toads. In that case Mr. 9, your posse gotta walk a whole load of roads. Naruto quirked an eyebrow as he tried to sort through what Kiribi, trying to find the meaning in the rhyme. So you're saying it isn't in Kaminari no Kuni? Kiribi nodded in that odd half-sagely, half-rapping manner of his. Didn't I say that? So don't be a brat, ya fool. Naruto just sighed. It was a shame they couldn't find what they were looking for here, although he supposed it saved him a lot of looking. If anybody would know if there was a summoning realm in their country it was Kumogakur. They were almost religious with their mapping of the nation. Their structured and rigid lifestyles didn't only extend to the military after all. Ah man, don't be so down, it ain't right to see that frown. If the chakra of nature's what you be seeking, Maybe it's the wrong direction you peekin', we. Naruto blinked again as he quickly sorted through the wrap, widening his eyes at the revelation. Do you mean you know where we can find a place to train in senjutsu? Kirby grinned as he crossed his arms over his sea again, bobbing his head slowly. Naruto had a feeling that in the dark-skinned man's head he was basking in the cheers of a large, very much imaginary crowd. Of course I know ya fool, ain't nobody the KB can't school, we. He raised his fist in the air, thumb index and pinky finger splayed out in some strange sign reminiscent of horns. Yo, don't you know about the island off the shore of our very own Kumo, ya fool? Naruto just waited for the man to continue, otherwise he knew the Kumo shinobi would never get back on track. Ain't no place closer to nature than that, just the same as these rhymes ain't flat, we. He made that odd sign again before looking at Naruto with a grin, a very self-satisfied grin. A few minutes later and Kirby had pointed the island out on a map Fu handily had on her person. She always carried a map of the country they were currently traveling in and Naruto would often catch her jotting down idle notes about the places they visited, although she would never actually show him what she wrote. It took a few minutes as Kirby was constantly trying to give them directions via rap and as trustworthy as he found the dark-skinned Jinchuriki, deciphering his instructions would take too long. And there ya go ya fools, now don't go being no tools ya here. Make sure you come visit me sometime Mr. 9, I gotta bounce ma, stala far someone who appreciates the rhyme, we. Naruto just smiled and nodded. As awkward as their reunion had been he did enjoy time with the unique Kumo Jinchuriki, however his friends didn't seem to share the sentiment if the quick headshakes were any indication. Sure, any time Kirby, I hope you enjoy your time with your Enka instructor. It was good seeing you again. Naruto grinned briefly in a similar manner to his fellow Jinchuriki, ya fool. Kirby grinned and once again offered his hand out for a fist bump which Naruto quickly reciprocated. Oh man that's right, man my rhyme's gonna get hella tight. We. With that the large, eccentric man pounded his C once before giving off the peace sign to the group, casually walking off down the mountainous road without a care in the world. Naruto chuckled as he turned around only to see all three of his companions staring at him evenly, a chill going down his spine as he met the cold, blank stares. You ever start speaking like that and I don't care how powerful you are, I'll put you in a genjutsu you'll never break out of. Haku nodded, one of the very few times he actually agreed with Tayuya on something. All the heat in the world won't unfreeze you if you do. They all turned to Fu as she stared at Naruto for a few seconds longer before turning on a heel and just walking off in the direction Kirby had shown them, her silence somehow even more unsettling than the others' threats. Of course Naruto knew she was just joking with him, probably, maybe. When Naruto thought he was used to intense heat he now realized that it was a very specific kind of heat. The scorching sun of Kei's no Kuni and the sweltering but often relaxing heat waves of Hai no Kuni barely fazed the young blonde. However it seemed there was a kind of heat that really got to him, thus the reason he now walked along with his robes open at the front and the sleeves rolled up, humid heat. It weighed down on him like a physical presence, making him feel heavy and lethargic and slowly sapping away his energy. His friends weren't faring much better though. If Tayuya had been complaining about the bare sun in the mountains of Kaminari no Kuni then it had nothing on this. Hell, Naruto just counted his blessings that for once the volatile redhead seemed too drained and hot to even complain about it. Fu seemed to be doing okay but Naruto knew better and understood the girl was faring just as badly as the rest of them, unwilling to show her discomfort even with the growing patches of sweat spreading across her usually crisp white clothing. Of course the only ice user of the group had the worst of it, his usually pale skin becoming pallid with an unhealthy sheen of sweat covering his boiling body. Of course the stoic Yuki never complained once but it didn't take the most observant Dujutsu to see his intense discomfort with their surroundings. Naruto just couldn't find it in him to blame him, he sympathized well with the Hyotenuse's plight. The reason for the group's individual grievances was the new environment they had been led to by Kirby's simultaneously helpful and unbelievably unwanted instruction. It seemed the rhyming Hachibi Jinchuriki had failed to mention to the quartet that the island he had instructed them to find was also a chokingly thick rainforest. It was so unlike any climate Naruto had experienced before, even the odd forests and jungles of Kawa no Kuni couldn't compare to the stifling, humid environment they found themselves in. Of course, on the other side of that coin, Naruto couldn't complain about the accuracy of what Kiribi had told them. He didn't need the Rinnegan to see that the area was abundant with strange and exotic wildlife. The whole island screamed nature at its most raw and primal. Of course, with it, Naruto almost couldn't believe the sheer beauty of the forest. Everything glowed with an unearthly and haunting pale green light that enshrouded everything from the trees to the ground in a soft emerald blanket. Not for the first time, Naruto wished he could share this wonderful sight with his friends, while simultaneously wondering how anybody could truly appreciate the beauty of nature without the ability to see its pure and untainted energy. Well, this seems like as good a place as any. There was none of the usual serene tone to the blonde's voice. For the first time in a long time, Naruto simply sounded the moderately irritated and young teen that he was. He was too hot and drained for anything else, and his companions either didn't mind or notice in the least, being in similar states of exhaustion. The problem with the rainforest was that there weren't all that many clearings, the flora overtaking every inch of the ground they could. Luckily, they had chanced upon a winding stream that, thankfully, had a small area on either side of its banks free from any immediate plant life. Ugh. Finally, Naruto couldn't find the energy to comment on Tayuya's language, so instead motioned with his hand, the earth beneath their feet responding his call as it leapt up as sand. Quickly, and to the never-diminishing surprise of his companions, a small, homely-looking house was constructed before them. Another moment later, and Naruto's fire-enshrouded hands had transformed the sand into a more sturdy-looking stone that shone with the moisture hanging in the air. It was similar to what he had done with the statue he made for Shizuku, but now he could manage it on a larger scale as his control over the Banbutsu Suzu improved. Whoa! He realized Tayuya and Haku were staring at him in shock before remembering they had never actually seen him perform the sage's original technique before. All the other places they had stopped for the nights, they either slept out under the stars or a simple sand hut would do. With them probably staying in this forest for a while, he figured something more substantial would be appropriate, thus, the stone house. It took them a while to get settled, which mostly consisted of Tayuya finding the coldest place in their new living arrangements, calling dibs and sleeping through the rest of the morning. Naruto did his usual affair of sending a few clones out to gather the lay of the land, while he himself wandered out into the forest to get acclimatized to the overwhelming energy he felt around him. Fu did much the same as Tayuya, settling in a cold spot and pulling out a scroll, quickly becoming lost to the world in favor of the fantasy in her hands. Haku, on the other hand, was uselessly trying to use his own bloodline in a futile attempt to cool himself down. It was like the environment itself was fighting against any ice he would make, the chakra-infused substance that even fire techniques struggled against melting away like it was normal frozen water. The dark-haired boy had a suspicion that after he came away from this place, his abilities to use ice would be stronger than ever. That was, if he didn't melt away like his ice did. Of course, all of them would come to adapt to the harsh and unfamiliar climate with time. They had plenty of it to spare after all. Hey, what the hell are you doing? Tayuya watched with an incredulous eye as Naruto calmly stood a few feet away from their recently built abode. Haku was also watching from some distance away, while Fu had wandered off somewhere, as she had a tendency to do sometimes without explanation. I am creating somewhere for us to practice being still. Tayuya just frowned, but that instantly morphed into a look of absolute shock as Naruto s his foot down once on the ground. Instantly the earth beneath them was upturned, a large brown clearing of flattened earth expanding out from where Naruto's foot had the ground. Soon they were all looking at a 10-meter wide ring of perfectly flat and level earth. With another look of concentration, Naruto this time crouched, palming the floor with both hands. Now what a woe, hey! Tayuya had to jump out of the way on instinct as a multitude of large and frighteningly tall pillars of stone rose from the new clearing, each one ending in a viciously sharp point. The redhead stared in shock for a moment before turning her equally vicious glare on the blonde that still had his hands on the earth. What the F was that? You trying to K me, you a woe? Her rant was quickly see off as Naruto shifted his hand imperceptibly, causing the ground underneath her feet to suddenly loosen, leading to her subsequent slip. Of course not, but you should be more careful, Tayuya, the ground's a little loose. From the side of the clearing, where he had been reading through a scroll, Haku let out a small chuckle, one eye almost hidden beneath a long black bang keeping watch over the two's antics. Of course that immediately turned Tayuya's ire on the normally quiet Yuki, her head whipping round to glare at him with double the intensity. Unfortunately, this had the effect of whipping her long hair around, a few strands of which loosely s her in the face, causing Haku's laughter to become louder. You find this funny f. Haku's chuckles quickly s down as his face once again became a mask, usually expressing a permanent, small smirk. Of course, this was to hide the irritation of Tayuya using that name for him. It irritated him to no end. From what he had learned of his clan under Zabuza's teachings, he found that all the men were somewhat feminine. His genetics wasn't his fault. The additional comments about his choices in clothing didn't tend to help. Kimonos were just comfortable is all. Of course not, Tayuya-san, you were the height of elegance as you fell of your What was there to draw amusement from? Tayuya simply fixed him with another glare as lightning seemed to spark between their locked eyes. Naruto just hid an amused smile of his own as he turned his attention back to what he was doing, focusing his chakra in ways he remembered from his earth manipulation training. Slowly, as if they were just growing there, a stack of simple, square S of rock rose from the ground nearby, allowing Naruto to finally release his grip on the earth. Now what are you doing? Naruto might have been surprised by Tayuya suddenly appearing behind him if he hadn't been absently keeping track of her position. In fact, he always kept track of where his friends were, just in case. It was how he knew Fu was currently up on the roof, either watching them or reading. It was usually one or the other. Recently he had found that she was becoming slightly distant and he wasn't sure why. It was something he would have to look into at some point. I am going to attempt the exercise the Shodai explained. Tayuya's eyebrow rose before she remembered back to the conversation with the two reanimated Kage, still one of the oddest and most inexplicable moments of her life to date. Although she had a feeling that if she continued to travel with these three there would be a few more similar moments waiting for her in the future. The balancing thingy. From the side, Haku chuckled again, immediately drawing Tayuya's gaze even as Naruto fought to not sigh into his hand. Got something to say, Haku-chan? This time Haku didn't manage to hide his irritation at the name as well, a small tick appearing over his brow before he could school his features. Oh no, I was just admiring your skill and eloquence with language. I couldn't put the balancing thingy into better words myself. Tayuya naturally flipped the young teen off, which of course led to them entering into one of their frequent bickering matches that, thankfully, Naruto could ignore. Instead he used chakra to walk up to the top of one of the pillar spikes, testing its sturdiness only to find himself pleasantly satisfied as he made it to the top. It took a bit of maneuvering and a shadow clone to get the stone S to rest atop the point, but soon enough it was ready for him to sit on. Thankfully he had made the spikes at different heights, so it was a simply matter to walk up a higher one before gently lowering his body onto the S itself. At this point Tayuya and Haku had stopped fighting to stare up in curiosity as Naruto relaxing his body into a natural meditation pose. It was the position he was most comfortable in, so it would make sense he could remain still in it for the longest time. The blonde could even feel Fu's eyes on him from her position on the roof, although he couldn't see her as he hadn't made the spikes quite that high. Huh. Well, this isn't so. Naruto's eyes widened a little as the stone plate wobbled, but he threw his hands out, steadying it and himself, his breathing slightly heavier at the near fall. Once he was satisfied he wouldn't shake again, he relaxed, bringing his arms back in, only for the S to wobble again, this time more violently. He had it under control again until he heard a very ominous scraping sound, which he knew to be the sound of the stone S slipping against the point of the pillar. Tayuya's raucous laughter rang out through the jungle clearing as the sounds of shattering stone pierced the still air and sounds of wildlife. Naruto simply gazed down at the broken remains of the S from where his sand had caught him from falling with a frown. He dropped down to the ground gracefully and allowed his sand to disperse back into the ground harmlessly as he gazed back up at the top of the spike, pondering how to stay still up there. That really sucked. His eyebrow rose as he turned to Tayuya, who was still holding her stomach, pangs of laughter gradually disappearing as she grinned at the blonde. I can't believe the monk can't even meditate properly. It's ridiculous. Naruto thought about explaining it wasn't just about meditation, but in the end decided against it as he reached around and grabbed another stone slab. Oi! Tayuya almost dodged the large square stone that was casually thrown her way, but grabbed it at the last moment, peeking her head up and over it to see Naruto looking at her expectantly. Go on then. For a moment the redhead paused, tilting her head up to look at the top of the pillar with a small amount of trepidation. However, all it took was seeing Naruto and Haku's expectant and disbelieving faces respectively to light a fire behind her eyes. Alright, I'll show you just how easy this is. Naruto figured he should have been surprised by how easily Tayuya had been manipulated into doing that, but it hadn't taken him long to work out she thought of herself as very independent. Anything she viewed as a possible slight on her skills was immediately taken to heart, filling her with determination to prove it not only to her detractors but to herself as well. She glared at the top of the spike as if it were the being that had challenged her, defying it to stop her in her goal. This'll be a piece of cake. Art Kami, damn it, this is impossible. Tayuya's eye was twitching violently as she once again glared up at the top of the spike in pure and unadulterated impudence. Naruto had joined Haku by the side of the clearing and lazily had his arm risen to control the sand Tayuya currently sat on. He figured it was probably close to the 15th time he had been forced to catch the girl in the last 5 minutes. Her first attempt had been rather promising. The redhead had just enough time after she sat down to poke her tongue out at the two boys before losing her balance and ungracefully dropping to the ground, or would have had Naruto not caught her. This is so stupid. The former Otokonoiki dropped from the sand to the ground as she glared at the stack of stone slabs like they were the cause of her problems. She glared for a few moments longer before taking a few steps back and slopping to the ground, adopting a loose meditative position as she closed her eyes, face still marred by a look of frustration and annoyance. Tayuya, what are you doing? Naruto was actually a little worried about what the girl might be attempting. He vividly remembered the statue, or not statue, of monk Gyatso. The girl didn't look around, slowly calming her breathing as Naruto got up and walked over, very wary at this point. That stupid balancing exercise is pointless. I bet I can do all this nature crap without it. Her face twisted for a moment into a sneer that crinkled her nose, but she never opened her eyes. I mean, you're me right. Being still is being still, it's not hard. Luckily she missed the few murmured comments from Haku about her proving the contrary. Naruto just frowned, remembering the warning of the Shodai clearly as he nodded once. Alright, but be careful. Tayuya just snorted, that same annoyed expression never leaving her features. Yeah, whatever, Ka-san. Naruto briefly gained a tick above his brow at the dismissal of his concern, but it was gone before it was even fully formed as the blonde let out a deep cleansing breath. Ironically, at the same time Tayuya did. So what, I'm just supposed to feel nature, or whatever, and draw it in, or some bull like that. Her entire tone was skeptical, but she never moved from her loose meditative stance. It might have impressed Naruto if he wasn't slightly annoyed by the mockery of proper meditation. Something like that. We don't know much about it ourselves. Tayuya just snorted at that but was quiet a moment later, deciding not to comment on the stupidity of trying something you didn't fully understand. It would probably just get her some passive-aggressive or sarcastic comment from Haku anyway, and those were really starting to get on her nerves. It didn't help that most of the time he won the verbal spars, his proper and eloquent speech outmatching her more vulgar and brash attitude. For a long time nothing seemed to happen. Haku even went back to his reading out of boredom, however Naruto never stopped watching the girl. He was actually astounded that she had gone this long without moving, never mind going this long without saying something generally repugnant or vulgar. However, even more interesting than that was what seemed to be happening all around her, even if it was invisible. An average person would miss it, but to Naruto's Rinnegan he saw everything. It was unbelievable. From the moment Tayuya stilled herself, even if it wasn't perfect, the energy all around her began to react. It was subtle at first, a simple swaying motion from the light green glow surrounding everything that could have been passed off as nothing. However, the longer Tayuya sat still, the more it began to move. Soon, the energy around the girl began creeping towards her. It was like watching water gravitates towards a depression in slow motion. It crept along her body, surrounded her, but did little else. Instead of absorbing it like he thought Tayuya might, it just seemed to sit on her skin, not doing anything in particular. It made Naruto wonder if the girl could actually feel anything of what was going on around her, even if it was invisible to her eyes. However, after around 10 minutes, when he had begun to practically feel the irritation and anger rolling off Tayuya in waves over the lack of any progress, something finally happened. Naruto had assumed that the lack of progress with the nature energy was due to Tayuya not being still enough for it to fully mold itself with the rest of her chakra. He was surprised then when the seal on her N, that had previously been a pale and lifeless gray, suddenly began to twist and move like it was alive. It glowed a strangely comforting green color, similar in fact to the energy currently surrounding the girl, although that may just have been to Naruto's vision. His eyes widened even further when the energy surrounding Tayuya finally began to move again. It crept up and around her form, gradually coalescing against the still writhing and twisting seal on her end before sinking into her body like it was water. Changes began to blossom over the redhead's form, even making Haku look up in surprise. Her skin darkened almost imperceptibly, closer to Fuu's natural hue while her hair did the opposite, lightening closer to a shade of pink. However, all of that was inconsequential to the changes happening inside her body. Her chakra flow that had before been a peaceful, calm flow, suddenly roared into life, the new, potent energy being quickly adapted to, as if it was used to it. Wow. Tayuya finally opened her eyes and Naruto was startled to see they had changed from her usual chocolate brown to a far more striking gold. Her eyes widened and a grin spread across her lips when she seemed to realize just what was happening to her. She took in a deep breath as if the world had just been opened up to her, sights and smells becoming apparent where before they were muted and dull. This is incredible. She grinned again before a thought obviously occurred to her, a challenging smirk spreading over her features. I told you this was easy. Her grin lessened slightly though as she saw the shocked looks over the two boys' faces. She also realized that she had meant to raise her arm to point at him, however no such thing happened. She looked down in confusion, finding her end feeling oddly stiff, only for her eyes to widen as she took in a sudden intake of breath. Her arms had turned a very unnatural gray, the same color as stone, and that was only spreading as she watched. Her panic only increased as she realized it was becoming increasingly difficult to move her body. What's going on? What's happening to me? Her shocked and panicked voice finally seemed to snap Naruto and Haku out of the dazed wonder. The blonde immediately shot forward, laying his palm flat against the redhead's back as the gray continued to crawl up her arms. Before she could cry out in indignation or ask what he was doing, the blonde immediately began to pull out the potent chakra that was causing all this. However, as always seemed to be the case with Naruto and his problems, it didn't seem to be that easy. It appeared that whatever nature chakra did when it entered the body required it to actually be molded in with the spiritual and physical energies, no doubt in a perfect balance of the three. The problem then lay in the fact that he couldn't separate the foreign chakra from her system. It was literally in all of her chakra. He frowned before standing up and moving around to the other side of the redhead, spotting her looking at him with wide, fearful eyes that were slightly watering around the edges. I don't want to s. Her voice was quiet, meek and everything that Tayuya just wasn't, and it made Naruto's heart contract slightly to hear someone he had come to consider a friend talk like that. You aren't going to. His voice was strong and unwavering as he sat down in front of the girl, placing his hands directly on her C. He ignored her blush at the contact though. This was definitely not the time for pettiness-like embarrassment. He needed the best access to her coils that he could get, so she would have to put up with it. Slowly he began to drain her body of chakra, taking it into his body before almost immediately venting it from the tenketsu around his hands so it wouldn't affect his own body. Move. Tayuya blinked uncomprehendingly. At this point the stone had spread all the way up her arms and was encroaching on the rest of her body from her legs. However, to her shock its spread seemed to be slowing down since Naruto made contact with her, slowing, but not stopping. What? Naruto didn't skip a beat, keeping a look of intense concentration as he continued to pull the harmful, at least at the moment, chakra from her system. Move. If drawing in nature chakra requires stillness, then movement will stop it. I am currently draining you of chakra, and if you don't start producing it without senjutsu molded in you will s. Tayuya's eyes widened, but luckily she was able to follow his instructions, moving her body left and right, up and down, anywhere that hadn't currently sickbed to the stone creeping over her body. After a good 5 minutes the stone finally started to retreat as the chakra in Tayuya's coils gradually began to be replaced by that untainted by senjutsu. Finally Naruto was able to let go of the girl as the last of the rough, gray texture receded from her skin. Thanks. Again, Tayuya seemed much smaller than Naruto was used to, much more frail and fragile after such a near-death experience. He just sighed. It had been a guess more than anything else. He had figured getting the senjutsu out of her system would halt the petrification, but he had no guarantee that it would reverse itself. He considered Tayuya incredibly lucky at this point, and he had a feeling she did too. This is why we learn in the correct order, by learning to be still first. His voice wasn't condescending, simply tired. Having the nature-molded chakra in his body, even if it was just in his hands, was incredibly exhausting. Tayuya just nodded timidly, still staring at her now dystonified limbs in mild shock. Naruto imagined that almost turning into a statue would be an eye-opening event, for anybody. I could freeze you still if that would help. Naruto was almost about to turn around and berate Haku for his insensitivity, however it seemed Tayuya beat him to it, snapping out of her shock to turn and glare venomously at the dark-haired teen. F off. Naruto raised his brow at the smirking Yuki before his features softened. It would seem Tayuya would be okay after all. Naruto was in a contemplative mood as he sat on the edge of the roof, his feet dangling over the edge as he rested his chin on his fist, staring at nothing in particular. He had taken to making little modifications to the house in his idle time, whenever he got bored or whenever anybody noted there was something missing. Right now it was beginning to take on the appearance of a very traditional Japanese home, lacking only the wood and the sliding doors. It even had a sloped, pagoda-styled roof with tiles that reminded Naruto a lot of the roofs back at the fire temple, which was probably the reason he made them that way in the first place. It had been around a month since they had come to the island and everybody at least seemed to be settling in. Despite the way it seemed Tayuya was a lot more shaken up by her experience with nature chakra than Naruto had originally thought. The girl seemed fearful of ever trying it again, although recently she had started to come around and consider it again. Naruto in the other hand wasn't having the best of luck with it. Staying perfectly still was proving to be an arduous task. He would feel the need to twitch his nose, or his fingers, or move his eyes or his breathing, or heart would betray him and lead to him falling off the spire. That was why he was up on the roof, just thinking about what he could do. Finally he got bored with it and hopped off the roof, landing silently on the ground below. He quickly walked straight past the large collection of unnatural pillars that had been taunting him for the past month and made his way into the forest. The moon was high in the sky and the air was thick with the same humidity as the day, but he was undeterred, walking towards where he sensed a familiar chakra signature. Fu and Tayuya were both in the house, probably asleep given the late hour, so it could only be one person. Can't sleep. Haku looked up from where he had been absently staring at the earth, his mind far away from what his eyes were seeing. I was just thinking about things. Naruto smiled lightly and settled down next to his friend, finding a comfortable position on the soft ground. He had abandoned the majority of his monk robes during his stay in the rainforest due to the heat, leaving him in only a light blue vest that was open at the front to reveal his C and a set of loose gray Hakama-styled pants. Fu had commented that it made him look like some vagabond ronin, especially with the horned forehead protector and earring he refused to take off and his hair done into a long, spiky ponytail. Sharing them might help. Haku looked around at Naruto before smiling softly, looking down at the ground. I was thinking about Zabuza-san. The boy paused for a moment before thinking better of himself. Zabuza-sensei. It's been 3 months since a quarter of a year. Naruto just nodded understandingly. Anniversaries of loved ones' deaths were always hard, he knew from experience. He was often filled with sad, pensive memories of Shizuku and the Ichirakus when those times of the year came around. Good. Haku looked around in slight confusion to see Naruto looking away from him, a slight smile of his own on his lips. You should keep the memories of the people you care about with you always. Haku nodded slowly before Naruto captured him with his gaze, his rippled orbs somehow entrancing the boy with the illusion that the rings rotated, even though when asked, Naruto had said they didn't. However, don't focus on his death, think of the good he did in his life, the better times you had with him, the reason you cherish his memory in the first place. Always focus on the bond, not the moment that you thought it broke. Haku widened his eyes at the soft, pensive tone that spoke of experience in this regard. However, that expression melted from the blonde's face as he suddenly smiled, standing up. Now come on, you need to always think about Zabuza, not just on anniversaries of his deaths. I need to get your mind on other things so you aren't dwelling on the past. Haku just stared at his friend in confusion, wondering what he had in mind, especially considering the excited tone in his voice. Come on, I've been meaning to show you something I've been working on for a while now. I think you of all people will appreciate this the most. Haku took the offered hand and allowed himself to be pulled to his feet, watching as Naruto took a few steps back from him before placing his hands in the ram seal. Watch this. And Haku did, his eyes widening in surprise and shock at what he thought to be impossible. What? But how? Naruto just grinned, letting a bit of his childish side out as he appreciated the shock and surprise on his friend's face. Pretty cool, right? He laughed at his pun as Haku stayed in shocked silence, both of them looking down at the ice that had formed in the blonde's palm, ice that had not been there a few moments ago. That will be all for this video. Be sure to like, subscribe, share, and comment down below for more videos. Goodbye.